You've heard the saying, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. 90% of wealthy families lose everything by the time the grandkids take over. But nobody ever tells you why. It's not the markets. It's not bad luck. It's not even bad investments. It's something far more dangerous, something invisible that lives inside the family itself. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what that is, and more importantly, how to make sure it never happens to yours. Let me paint you a picture. In 1890, the Vanderbilts were the wealthiest family in America. Cornelius Vanderbilt had built a fortune worth, in today's dollars, over $200 billion. That's not a typo. 200 billion. By the 1970s, just 3 generations later, the family held a reunion. 120 descendants showed up, and not a single one of them was a millionaire. Let that sink in. $200 billion evaporated in 3 generations. Not through war, not through revolution, not through some catastrophic market event. Through behavior, through the invisible, daily, repeated behaviors that every family has but almost no family talks about. Now compare that to the Rothschilds. The family has maintained significant wealth for over 200 years, more than 6 generations. Or the Rockefellers, who've preserved their fortune across 7 generations and still operate one of the most powerful family offices in the world. What do these surviving dynasties have that the Vanderbilts didn't? It's not better investments. The Vanderbilts had access to the same markets. It's not better lawyers. They had the best money could buy. It's not even better timing. It's behavioral patterns. And here's the thing that should keep you up at night. Behavioral patterns are transferable. That means they can be learned. They can be installed. They can be passed from one generation to the next, like a blueprint. But they can also be lost. And once they're lost, the money follows. This video is about those patterns. Every single one. The ones that build dynasties and the ones that destroy them. And by the end, you'll understand something most people never figure out. That generational wealth is not a number in a bank account. It's a way of thinking, acting, and being that makes the number irrelevant. Pattern number 1, the delayed gratification code. Let's start with the most fundamental behavioral pattern of all, and the one that almost every first-generation wealth builder gets right, and almost every second-generation member gets wrong. Delayed gratification. I know, you've heard this 1,000 times. Rich people delay gratification. It sounds like a cliché, but here's where most people misunderstand it. They think delayed gratification means saving money instead of spending it. That's like saying flying a plane means sitting in a cockpit. Technically true, but wildly incomplete. Delayed gratification, as a generational behavioral pattern, is not about individual choices. It's about an operating system that the family installs into every member from birth. Let me explain. A first-generation wealth builder, let's call him the founder, he doesn't need anyone to teach him delayed gratification. Life taught him. He grew up without money. Every dollar he saved was a dollar he didn't have before. The pain of poverty was his teacher. He doesn't spend recklessly, not because he read a book about it, but because his nervous system literally won't let him. The memory of being broke is encoded in his body. Now here's the problem. His children, the second generation, they grow up in comfort. Maybe not wild luxury, but comfort. They've never felt that pain. Their nervous system has no reference point for we could lose everything. So when they encounter delayed gratification as a concept, it's abstract. It's a rule someone told them, not a feeling they carry. They can follow the rule when they're being watched, but they don't feel it in their bones. And the third generation? They grow up in affluence. Real affluence. They've never even seen financial anxiety. Delayed gratification to them sounds like a punishment, like someone is trying to take away something they deserve. They don't just lack the pattern, they actively resist it. This is what the research calls the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves cycle, and it happens in roughly 70% of family wealth transitions. Not because the money runs out first, but because the behavioral pattern runs out first, and the money follows. The families that survive, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the families you've never heard of because they prefer it that way, they solve this problem differently. They don't rely on personal experience to teach delayed gratification. They build systems that make it the default. What kind of systems? Family constitutions, written documents, sometimes 50, 100 pages long, that spell out exactly how family money can be used, what each generation is entitled to, what requires collective approval, and what's simply not allowed. These aren't suggestions. They're binding. Violating them has real consequences. Loss of access to family trusts, removal from the family office structure, sometimes even legal ramifications. Mandatory financial education, not optional. Not, here's a book, read it if you want. Structured, required education that starts in childhood and continues through adulthood. Many old money families require their children to work outside jobs before they can access any family resources. They require them to submit personal budgets. They require them to present investment proposals to a family committee, the same way you'd present to a venture capital firm. Staggered access, trust structures that don't dump a fortune on a 21-year-old. Instead, access is granted in stages, tied to age milestones, education completion, financial literacy benchmarks, and demonstrated responsibility. This isn't control for the sake of control. It's engineered delayed gratification built into the legal structure itself. Here's what makes this a behavioral pattern rather than just a rule. It shapes identity. Children who grow up in these systems don't think of themselves as rich kids with restrictions. They think of themselves as stewards. They understand, viscerally, not just intellectually, that the money doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the family. Their job is to grow it, protect it, and pass it on. That identity shift is the difference between a family that burns through $200 billion in 3 generations and a family that's still going strong after 200 years. Pattern number 2, the stewardship identity. This brings us to the second behavioral pattern, and it might be the most important one in this entire video, because it's the pattern that makes all the other patterns possible or impossible. I call it the stewardship identity. Here's the core idea. The way a family member identifies in relation to the family wealth determines everything. How they spend, how they invest, how they talk about money with their children, how they handle setbacks, and ultimately, whether the wealth survives their generation. There are 2 identities a family member can adopt. Identity A, the owner. This person thinks, this money is mine. I inherited it. I can do what I want with it. They see the wealth as personal property. They make decisions unilaterally. They prioritize their lifestyle, their desires, their status. They might love their family, but when push comes to shove, their individual wants come first. Identity B, the steward. This person thinks, this money was entrusted to me. It belongs to something bigger than me. My role is to grow it, protect it, and pass it on. They see the wealth as a living organism that they are caring for. They make decisions collectively. They prioritize the family's long-term position over their personal short-term desires. Now here's what's fascinating, and this is backed by decades of family wealth research from organizations like the Family Office Exchange and the Williams Group's 25-year study of 3,250 family wealth transfers. The steward identity is the single strongest predictor of whether generational wealth survives. Not the size of the fortune, not the quality of the investments, not the sophistication of the legal structures, the identity. Why? Because identity drives behavior, and behavior compounds over time just like money does. Except behavior compounds faster and with much larger consequences. A steward who makes a 3% annual return on a well-protected portfolio will outperform an owner who makes 15% returns, but spends 20% of the principal on lifestyle. Over 30 years, that math isn't even close. But here's the really interesting part. The steward identity doesn't happen by accident. It has to be cultivated, and the families that understand this have developed remarkably consistent methods for doing it. Method 1. The origin story. Every surviving dynasty has an origin story. And it's not just entertainment. It's identity programming. The story of how the family built its wealth is told and retold, not to glorify the founder, but to embed a critical lesson. This wealth was created through sacrifice, discipline, and persistence. It was not easy. It was not lucky. It was earned, and it can be unearned just as easily. The Vanderbilts lost their origin story. By the third generation, the family's narrative had shifted from "we built this" to "we have this." When the founding sacrifice becomes invisible, so does the need for stewardship. The Rockefellers, by contrast, maintained their origin story obsessively. John D. Rockefeller's practice of keeping a ledger of every penny he spent started when he was earning 50 cents a day, was taught to every subsequent generation. The family didn't just tell the story, they made descendants live it. Children were required to track their spending in ledgers just like the founder did. The behavior was physically replicated, not just verbally remembered. Method 2. Collective decision-making. Stewardship can't exist in isolation. The moment one person controls the money, the owner identity takes over. Not because they're greedy, but because power without accountability always drifts towards self-interest. Old money families solve this through family governance structures. Family councils, family assemblies, investment committees where multiple generations have voting rights. These aren't symbolic, they have real authority. Major financial decisions require collective agreement. This forces every family member to think beyond their own desires and consider the impact on the whole. It also creates something powerful: peer accountability. When you know your cousins, your siblings, your children will review your decisions. You think differently. The steward identity is reinforced by the group, not just by willpower. Method 3. Mandatory contribution. Many generational wealth families require members to contribute to the family enterprise, not as a burden, but as an identity-building mechanism. You don't just receive from the family, you add to it. This could mean working in the family business, managing a portion of the investment portfolio, leading the family's philanthropic efforts, or even just participating in financial education programs and reporting back. The psychological principle here is simple but profound. We value what we contribute to. When someone has skin in the game, even symbolic skin, their relationship with the family wealth shifts from entitlement to ownership of a different kind. Not "I own this money," but "I own my role in this family's mission." Pattern number 3, the communication architecture. All right, let me hit you with a number that might surprise you. According to the Williams Group's landmark study, they tracked 3,250 family wealth transfers over 25 years. 60% of generational wealth failures are caused by a breakdown in communication and trust within the family. Not bad investments, not market crashes, not excessive spending, not even bad legal structures. Communication. Think about that for a second. The thing most likely to destroy your family's wealth isn't a recession or a bad stock pick. It's your family not talking to each other effectively. And yet, when families sit down to plan their wealth transfer, what do they focus on? The legal structures, the tax optimization, the investment strategy, all the things that account for less than 15% of wealth transfer failures. The communication architecture, how a family shares information, resolves conflicts, makes decisions, and handles disagreements, accounts for more than all other factors combined, and almost nobody works on it intentionally. So what does a functional communication architecture look like in families that preserve generational wealth? Let me break it down. Component 1, transparent financial information. This is the big one. In families that lose wealth, financial information is hoarded. The patriarch or matriarch controls all knowledge of the family's assets, and the next generation doesn't find out the real numbers until the will is read, if then. This is catastrophic for multiple reasons. First, you can't be a steward of something you can't see. If the next generation doesn't know the size, structure, or performance of the family wealth, they can't possibly make good decisions about it. They're flying blind. Second, information asymmetry breeds distrust. When one family member knows everything and others know nothing, suspicion grows. The less informed members start to imagine the worst. Maybe there's less money than they're telling us, or maybe they're hiding something, or maybe my sibling is getting a better deal. This distrust doesn't just affect financial decisions. It destroys family relationships. And when family relationships break down, coordinated stewardship becomes impossible. Each person starts operating in their own interest. The owner identity replaces the steward identity. And the wealth fragments. Families that survive multiple generations do the opposite. They share financial information openly, regularly, structurally. Many hold annual family meetings where the full financial picture is presented: assets, liabilities, performance, strategy, challenges, everything. Age-appropriate versions are shared with children. There are no secrets about the money. Does this create risk? Sure. A 19-year-old who knows there's $50 million in the family trust might make different choices than one who doesn't. But the alternative, a 19-year-old who discovers it at 35 with zero preparation, is far more dangerous. Component 2, conflict resolution protocols. Every family has conflict. The difference between families that survive and families that don't isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of a system for handling it. Wealthy families that break apart typically follow a familiar script. A disagreement arises, often about money, but sometimes about something else. There's no established way to resolve it. It escalates, sides form, communication stops, and eventually you have two branches of a family that haven't spoken in a decade, each controlling a fragment of what was once a unified portfolio. Families that preserve wealth across generations have predetermined conflict resolution mechanisms. Some use family constitutions that spell out how disputes are handled. Some bring in neutral third-party mediators, not just when there's a crisis, but regularly, before small disagreements become wars. Some establish family councils with rotating membership so that no single branch can dominate. The key insight: conflict resolution isn't something you figure out in the moment. By the time you need it, emotions are too high and positions are too entrenched. It has to be built in advance, when everyone is still getting along, and it has to be treated as binding, not optional. Component 3. Defined roles and decision rights. Ambiguity destroys families faster than almost anything else. When it's unclear who has the authority to make what decisions, every choice becomes a power struggle. Should we sell the real estate? Can we access the trust for this investment? Who approves philanthropic distributions? Families that survive have this mapped out explicitly. Decision rights are defined, sometimes by the family constitution, sometimes by the trust structure, sometimes by both. Everyone knows what they can decide independently and what requires collective agreement. This doesn't eliminate disagreement, but it turns disagreements from existential threats into procedural events. Instead of, "Do I even have a say in this family?" it becomes, "Let's check the Constitution." This decision requires a 60% vote of the family council. Same passion, different framework, and the framework makes all the difference. Pattern number 4, the investment behavior. Gap. Now let's talk about how generational wealth families actually invest, because this is another area where the behavior matters more than the returns. There's a famous study by Dalbar that gets cited in every personal finance book, and it shows that the average equity investor earns about 4% per year, while the S&P 500 returns about 10%. That 6% gap, called the behavior gap, is entirely caused by investor behavior: buying high, selling low, chasing hot sectors, panic selling during crashes, sitting in cash during recoveries. Now here's the twist: that behavior gap gets worse across generations, not better. Here's why. The founder built the wealth. He knows what it took. He has conviction. He can watch his portfolio drop 40% in a crash and hold, not because he's some Zen master, but because he's already survived worse, and because his identity isn't tied to the portfolio's value. He knows who he is with, or without the money. The second generation? They didn't build it. They inherited the portfolio along with a lifestyle that depends on it. When markets crash, they feel it viscerally. Not just the numbers dropping, but their identity, their status, their entire sense of security eroding. They're far more likely to panic sell. The third generation, they don't even understand the investments. To them, the portfolio is an abstraction, something that exists to fund their lifestyle. They don't track performance. They don't understand risk. When a crash comes, they don't panic sell. They just stop paying attention entirely. And then they're shocked when the money runs out. Old money families that survive this pattern solve it with something I call investment behavioral architecture. Systems that make good investment behavior the path of least resistance. Architecture Element 1. Professional management with family oversight. They don't manage the money themselves, but they don't outsource it blindly either. They use professional investment managers, but within a framework of family oversight. The family sets the investment policy, risk tolerance, asset allocation, time horizon, values alignment. The professionals execute. The family reviews performance regularly but doesn't micromanage. This structure does something crucial. It separates the emotional impulse from the financial decision. When a family member wants to pull everything out of stocks during a crash, they can't. They have to go through the investment committee. And by the time the committee meets, discusses, and votes, the emotional impulse has usually subsided. The behavior gap narrows. Architecture element 2, long-term time horizons. Generational wealth families think in decades, not quarters. This isn't just philosophy, it's structural. Trusts are often designed with 50 to 100-year time horizons. Family investment policies specify minimum holding periods. Performance is evaluated on 10-year rolling averages, not annual returns. This long-term orientation fundamentally changes the investment behavior. When your benchmark is, how did we do over the last 30 years, instead of, how did we do this quarter, you make completely different decisions. You stop chasing trends. You stop trying to time the market. You start thinking about compounding as the primary driver of returns, rather than speculation. And here's the beautiful thing about compounding. It's forgiving of almost everything except interruption. If you can simply avoid interrupting the compounding process by panic selling, by overspending, by making emotional decisions, you will almost certainly grow wealth over time. The behavior gap isn't about being smart, it's about being still. Architecture element 3, diversification as a behavioral tool. Most people think of diversification as a risk management strategy, spreading investments across different asset classes so that no single failure can destroy the portfolio. And that's true. But for generational wealth families, diversification serves a second, equally important purpose. It reduces the emotional intensity of any single investment. When your entire net worth is in one company or one property or one asset class, every fluctuation in that asset feels like a life or death event. Your emotions are dialed up to 11. Every decision is high stakes because it actually is high stakes. But when your wealth is spread across public equities, private businesses, real estate, bonds, alternative investments, and cash, no single asset can hurt you badly enough to trigger a panic response. The emotional stakes of any single decision are lower. Better behavior becomes easier, not because of willpower, but because the environment no longer triggers the fear response. This is a principle that applies far beyond investing. The best way to improve behavior isn't to strengthen willpower. It's to redesign the environment so that good behavior becomes natural. Pattern number 5, the lifestyle calibration. Mechanism. This next pattern might be the one that destroys more family wealth than any other. It's also the one that nobody wants to talk about. Lifestyle creep across generations. Here's how it works. The founder lives below his means. He drives a reliable car, not a flashy one. He lives in a comfortable house, not a mansion. His lifestyle is calibrated to a fraction of his income. This gap between what he earns and what he spends is where the wealth actually accumulates. His children grow up in this comfortable but not extravagant environment. They see financial discipline modeled, but they also know the family is wealthy. And as they enter adulthood, they begin to calibrate their lifestyle not to what they earn, but to what the family has. They upgrade, not dramatically, just one level up. A nicer house, a better car, private schools for the kids, a vacation home. The third generation never knew the founder's discipline. They grew up in the upgraded lifestyle. To them, this isn't wealth, it's just normal. Their baseline for normal is already calibrated far above what the portfolio can sustainably support, and they upgrade from there. Designer everything, multiple homes, staff, entertainment, philanthropy as social currency rather than genuine giving. At each generation, the lifestyle ratchets up, but the income from the portfolio doesn't necessarily keep pace. The gap between earning and spending narrows, then it closes, then it reverses. The family starts eating into principal, and once that starts, the math becomes brutal. A portfolio that supports a 3% withdrawal rate indefinitely will be destroyed by a 7% withdrawal rate in roughly 30 years. That's one generation. Now here's where this gets really interesting and really painful, because the solution isn't just spend less. The solution requires a family to have a structural conversation about what lifestyle the portfolio was actually designed to support, and then enforce it. The families that survive have something called a lifestyle calibration mechanism. It's not just a budget, it's a shared family agreement about the standard of living that the family wealth can sustainably support, adjusted periodically for portfolio performance and inflation. This agreement usually includes a defined annual distribution rate, typically 3 to 5% of portfolio value, calculated on a trailing 3-year average to smooth out market fluctuations. Clear guidelines on what's covered by the family office, housing, education, healthcare, and what's personal responsibility, luxury goods, entertainment, travel beyond a defined budget. A governance process for exceptions. Large expenditures that exceed the standard distribution require family council approval. Regular recalibration. If the portfolio underperforms, distributions decrease. If it outperforms, they increase modestly. But the core principle is the lifestyle serves the wealth, not the other way around. This is hard, really hard. It requires a family to sit down together and essentially agree to limit their own spending, not because they can't afford more right now, but because they can't afford it forever. It requires the second and third generation to voluntarily accept a lifestyle that's less extravagant than they could technically afford in the short term, for the sake of a future they won't live to see. That's stewardship. And that's why it's the hardest behavioral pattern to maintain. Pattern number 6, the education pipeline. Let me tell you about one of the most counterintuitive findings in family wealth research. When families are surveyed about what they want to pass on to the next generation, they overwhelmingly rank financial assets as their top priority. When those same families are asked what they think will cause their wealth to fail, they rank inadequate preparation of heirs as the number one risk. They know the problem, they just don't solve it. The gap between knowing your heirs need education and actually delivering it, that's where the 6th behavioral pattern lives. I call it the education pipeline. And the key word is pipeline, not program. A program has a start and end date. A pipeline is continuous. It's always flowing, always developing, always preparing the next person for the next stage. Here's what a functional education pipeline looks like in families that preserve generational wealth. Ages 5 to 12, money awareness. Children are taught what money is, where it comes from, and the basic concept of earning and saving. They receive an allowance, but it's tied to responsibilities, not given freely. They're taught to allocate their allowance into categories: spending, saving, and giving. Many families introduce the concept of matching. If the child saves a certain amount, the family matches it, teaching the principle of incentive-aligned saving from day one. But here's what: separates wealth-preserving families from the rest. They also teach their children about the family wealth in age-appropriate terms. Our family has resources that we manage together. Here's what that means. Here's what's expected of you as a member of this family. The children are told they're part of something, not that they're special, but that they have a role. Ages 13 to 18, financial literacy teenagers receive structured financial education. Not just personal finance, though that's included, but the specific mechanics of the family's wealth. How the trusts are structured, what the family office does, how the investments are allocated, why certain decisions were made. This isn't just abstract knowledge, it's practical training. Many families require teenagers to present a mock investment thesis to the family, pick a stock or an asset class, research it, and explain why they'd invest. The family provides feedback. The teenager learns that investing is about disciplined analysis, not gut feeling. This is also when many families introduce the concept of work outside the family enterprise. Children are expected to hold summer jobs, internships, or entry-level positions where they experience what it means to earn money from someone who isn't family. This builds empathy, humility, and a realistic understanding of the broader economic world. Ages 19 to 25. Practical application. Young adults are given increasing but supervised access to family resources. They might manage a small portion of the portfolio. They might participate in family investment committee meetings as observers, then as voting members. They're expected to maintain their own finances separately, budgeting, saving, investing their personal income, while also learning how the family wealth operates. Many families require young adults to create a personal financial plan and present it to the family council annually. This isn't about control, it's about accountability and skill building. If you can't manage your own finances, you're not ready to participate in managing the family's. Ages 25 plus, stewardship role. Adults who have completed the pipeline are expected to take on formal stewardship responsibilities. This might mean serving on the investment committee, leading a philanthropic initiative, mentoring the next generation, or managing a specific area of the family enterprise. The pipeline doesn't end. It evolves from receiving education to providing it. Now, let me be honest about why this pipeline fails in most families. It fails because the parents who should be building it are too uncomfortable to start. The founder doesn't want to talk about money with his kids because his parents never talk to him about money. It feels wrong. It feels like burdening them. It feels like telling them too much too soon. The second generation doesn't want to enforce rules because they remember how it felt to be restricted by the founder. They want to give their kids the freedom they didn't have. They conflate freedom with no structure, and so the pipeline is never built. The children learn about the family wealth the way most people learn about sex, from the internet, from friends, and from bad experiences. They either overestimate what they have and spend accordingly, or they underestimate it and feel permanently anxious. Neither leads to good stewardship. The families that get this right understand something fundamental. Financial education isn't about teaching skills, it's about building identity. A child who goes through this pipeline doesn't just know how to invest, they know who they are in relation to the family wealth. They're a steward. That identity, once built, is remarkably resilient. Pattern number 7, the governance skeleton. All right, let's get into the structure, because at some point, all of these behavioral patterns need a framework to live in. They need bones. That's what family governance is, the skeleton that holds the behavioral patterns together. Without it, everything collapses into personality-dependent chaos. With it, the patterns survive even when individual family members falter. Let me break down the governance skeleton that surviving generational wealth families typically use. Layer 1, the family assembly. This is the broadest governance body. Every adult family member, usually defined as anyone over 18 or 21, depending on the family, is a member. The assembly meets annually, receives a full financial report, votes on major family decisions, and elects members to the family council. The assembly serves a critical psychological function. It says to every family member, "You matter. You have a voice. You are part of this." This is the antidote to the resentment that builds when people feel excluded from decisions that affect their lives. Layer 2, the family council. This is the executive body, usually 5 to 9 members, elected by the assembly, serving staggered terms to ensure continuity. The council meets quarterly, manages the day-to-day governance of the family wealth, oversees the family office, and handles disputes that don't require full assembly involvement. The council structure matters because it creates accountability without paralysis. Every major decision has a clear path. If it's routine, the council handles it. If it's strategic, it goes to the assembly. If it's about governance itself, changing the Constitution, adding new branches, it requires a supermajority. Layer 3, the family constitution. This is the master document. It's not a legal trust. It's a social contract. It spells out the family's mission and values, membership criteria, who counts as a family member for governance purposes, distribution policies, how much can each person access and under what conditions, decision-making protocols, who decides what and how, conflict resolution procedures, amendment processes, how the Constitution itself can be changed. A good family constitution is living. It's reviewed and updated regularly, usually every 3 to 5 years. It's not sacred scripture, it's an operating manual, and the process of reviewing it together is almost as valuable as the document itself, because it forces the family to have the conversations they'd otherwise avoid. Layer 4, the family office. This is the operational arm. It manages investments, handles tax and legal matters, coordinates philanthropy, manages real estate, and provides financial education resources. The family office reports to the council and is accountable to the assembly. What makes the family office different from a typical wealth management firm is alignment. A family office serves one client, the family, and its incentives are structured accordingly. They're not trying to sell products. They're not compensated based on transaction volume. They're measured on long-term portfolio performance, family satisfaction, and successful generational transitions. Layer 5, the Next Gen Committee. This is the pipeline governance, a dedicated committee responsible for designing, implementing, and evolving the education pipeline. They track each young family member's development, organize mentoring relationships, plan family meetings, and ensure that the stewardship identity is being cultivated in every generation. This layer is crucial because it makes the education pipeline someone's actual job, not a nice idea that everyone agrees with but nobody owns. Pattern number 8, the philanthropy bridge. Here's a pattern that surprised me when I first encountered it in the research, but once you understand it, it makes perfect sense. Families that preserve generational wealth across multiple generations are almost always engaged in structured, multi-generational philanthropy. Not just writing checks. Structured philanthropy with governance, strategy, and generational participation. And the reason isn't what you think. Yes, philanthropy provides tax benefits. Yes, it creates positive public relations. But the real value of philanthropy as a behavioral pattern is that it bridges the gap between personal identity and family mission. Let me explain. Wealth without purpose creates emptiness. This isn't spiritual woo-woo. It's documented in the psychological literature on affluenza and the mental health challenges of inherited wealth. When someone receives wealth, they didn't create. Without a meaningful role to play in the family's story, they experience a particular kind of existential discomfort. I have everything, but nothing means anything. Philanthropy solves this by giving each family member a mission that connects them to the family's wealth without centering that wealth on their personal consumption. Instead of what can I buy, the question becomes what can we build? And that shift is everything. Here's how structured philanthropy functions as a behavioral pattern. It develops financial skills in a safe environment. Managing a philanthropic portfolio, evaluating grant proposals, assessing impact, budgeting distributions, measuring outcomes is remarkably similar to managing an investment portfolio. But the stakes are lower and the feedback is more human. Young family members learn to allocate capital, think strategically, and evaluate performance in a context where mistakes are learning opportunities rather than financial catastrophes. It builds family cohesion across generations. Different generations often have different values, different interests, different worldviews. Structured philanthropy creates a space where those differences become assets rather than divisions. The older generation might prioritize education funding. The younger generation might focus on climate change. Instead of fighting about whose values are right, the family governance structure allows both to be expressed through coordinated giving. They're working together even when they disagree. It counteracts the entitlement narrative. When children grow up seeing their family's wealth used to improve other people's lives and participating in those decisions, they develop a fundamentally different relationship with money. Money becomes a tool for impact rather than a ticket for consumption. The steward identity is reinforced through action, not just words. It creates external accountability. A family foundation that makes grants to external organizations is accountable to those organizations, to the communities they serve, and to the public. This external scrutiny creates a discipline that purely internal family structures can't replicate. You can't be sloppy with a foundation's finances because the IRS is watching, the grantees are watching, and the public is watching. The families that get the most behavioral value from philanthropy treat it as a core family activity, not a side project. Philanthropy isn't something the family does after the real work of investing and spending. It is the real work. It's where the family's identity is most visible to the world and most tangible to its members. Pattern number 9, the resilience protocol. Let me tell you about the single most stressful event in any family's wealth journey. It's not the day they make their fortune. It's not the day they set up their trust. It's the day something goes catastrophically wrong, and they discover whether their systems actually work. A market crash, a lawsuit, a bad investment, a scandal, a family dispute that goes public, a regulatory change that upends their entire structure. Every generational wealth family will face at least one existential crisis. The question isn't whether it will happen. It's whether the family will have a resilience protocol in place when it does. The resilience protocol is the behavioral pattern that determines whether a crisis becomes a setback or a death blow. And it has three components. Component 1, predefined crisis communication. When a crisis hits, the first instinct is silence. Don't tell anyone. Handle it quietly. Protect the family's reputation. This instinct is almost always wrong. Silence creates a vacuum, and that vacuum fills with fear, speculation, and worst-case assumptions. Family members start calling each other privately. Did you hear about this? What's really going on? Are we going to be okay? Each conversation adds a layer of distortion. Within days, the family's internal narrative has spiraled far beyond the actual crisis. Families with resilience protocols solve this in advance. They have a predefined communication chain for crisis situations. Who gets informed first, how information flows, what channels are used, and, critically, a commitment to transparency even when the news is bad. The protocol is practiced before the crisis, so when the real thing hits, it's muscle memory, not a panicked invention. Component 2, decision-making under stress. Crises require fast decisions, but fast decisions made under stress are often terrible decisions. The adrenaline, the fear, the urgency, they all push toward action when the best move might be stillness. Resilient families have a pre-commitment framework, a set of principles they have agreed to follow during crises, decided when they were calm. Things like, we will not make major portfolio changes during a market crash without a 72-hour cooling period and a 2/3 vote of the family council. We will not engage in public disputes. All public communications go through one designated family spokesperson. We will not make permanent structural changes, selling assets, dissolving trusts, changing governance during a crisis. Only temporary measures until the crisis has passed and we can think clearly. These pre-commitments are the behavioral equivalent of wearing a seatbelt. They're slightly constraining during normal times and absolutely life-saving during emergencies. Component 3, the post-crisis review. After the immediate crisis has passed, most families want to forget it happened. Move on, don't dwell on it. Resilient families do the opposite. They conduct a formal post-crisis review. What happened, what we did right, what we did wrong, what systems failed, what systems saved us, and what we need to change before the next one. This review is written down, shared with the full family assembly, and incorporated into the family's institutional memory. Future generations will read these reviews and learn from crises they never experienced, gaining the behavioral benefits without paying the emotional tuition. The resilience protocol isn't about preventing crises. It's about making the family anti-fragile, stronger after each shock, rather than merely surviving it. Pattern number 10, the spouse integration protocol. Okay, this one is uncomfortable, but if I don't tell you, who will? The number one cause of family wealth fragmentation isn't bad investments or market crashes or even poor spending, it's divorce. And specifically, it's the failure to integrate spouses into the family's wealth governance and behavioral patterns. Here's the uncomfortable reality. When someone marries into a generational wealth family, they're entering a system they didn't build, don't fully understand, and have no innate loyalty to. That's not a criticism. It's simply true. They grew up in a different family with different norms, different money scripts, different behavioral patterns. They were shaped by their family's relationship with money, which might be the polar opposite of the family they're marrying into. If the receiving family doesn't intentionally integrate the new spouse, if they just assume they'll figure it out, or worse, if they deliberately exclude them from financial information and governance, the results are predictable. The spouse never develops the stewardship identity. The spouse never understands the family's behavioral patterns. The spouse brings their own money scripts, which may be completely incompatible. When conflict arises, not if, when, the spouse defaults to their original programming. If the marriage ends, the wealth fragments, sometimes catastrophically. Families that survive across generations treat spouse integration as a formal process. Pre-marriage conversations about money. Before a marriage, the family openly discusses how their wealth is structured, what the behavioral expectations are, and what joining the family means financially. This isn't a prenup conversation. It's a culture conversation. Here's who we are. Here's how we operate. Here's what we expect. Is this something you want to be part of? Invitation into governance. New spouses are invited, not immediately, but within a reasonable period, into the family governance structure. They attend family assemblies. They're given access to financial information, within the same framework as blood relatives. They're assigned mentoring relationships with existing family members. The message is clear: you're not an outsider, you're one of us. Adoption of the stewardship identity. The family actively works to help new spouses develop the steward identity. This means including them in philanthropic decisions, investment education, and family mission discussions. It means showing them that the family's wealth isn't about privilege, it's about responsibility. Legal structures that balance inclusion and protection. Trusts, prenuptial agreements, and estate plans are designed to both include the spouse in the family system and protect the family wealth in case of divorce. This is a delicate balance, and getting it wrong on either side creates problems. Too much protection feels like distrust and undermines the spouse's commitment to stewardship. Too little protection leaves the wealth vulnerable to fragmentation. I know this can feel cold, clinical, but the families that refuse to have these conversations, the ones who believe love will solve everything, are the ones who end up in court, fighting over assets, with the family wealth fractured and the family relationships destroyed. The resilience protocol applies here too. The best time to build the structure is before the crisis. The best time to integrate a spouse is at the beginning of the relationship, not after a conflict has already erupted. Before I get into the final two patterns, and these might be the two that tie everything together, let me ask you something. If this video is giving you value, if you're starting to see generational wealth differently than you did 40 minutes ago, do me a favor and hit that like button. It takes less than a second, but it tells YouTube this content is worth showing to more people, and that helps more families access this information. Subscribe if you haven't already, because the videos I'm releasing in the coming weeks go even deeper on family wealth strategy, money psychology, and the specific systems that separate families that make it from families that don't. You won't want to miss them. All right, let's get into pattern 11. Pattern number 11, the wealth verb, not the wealth noun. This is the pattern that once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's the master pattern that explains why some families preserve wealth and others don't. Even when they have all the same legal structures, all the same financial resources, all the same educational opportunities. I call it the wealth verb. Here's the insight. Most families treat wealth as a noun, a thing, an object you possess. We have wealth. Our wealth is X. We need to protect our wealth. But in families that survive across generations, wealth is a verb, an action, a process, something the family does, not something the family has. The distinction seems subtle, but it changes everything. When wealth is a noun, the goal is preservation. Keep the thing safe. Don't lose it. Put walls around it. The psychology is defensive. Fear of loss dominates. Decisions are made to avoid downside rather than capture upside. The family's relationship with money becomes increasingly anxious and controlling. When wealth is a verb, the goal is continuation through generation. The family doesn't just protect the pile, they actively engage in the process of growing, deploying, and transmitting the behaviors that create and sustain wealth. The psychology is generative, possibility dominates. Decisions are made to create value, not just avoid loss. Let me make this concrete. Noun family behavior. Don't touch the principal. We need to protect what Grandpa built. The investments are set, let's not mess with them. Just don't lose it. The family office becomes a fortress, designed to repel threats rather than create opportunities. Verb family behavior. How do we make the principal work harder? How do we honor what Grandpa built by building something of our own? What new opportunities should we be exploring? How do we grow what we've been given? The family office becomes an engine designed to generate value across generations. The verb orientation doesn't mean reckless risk-taking. Remember, the investment behavioral architecture from pattern number 4 still applies. It means that within the risk parameters, the family is actively seeking to grow, learn, adapt, and create, not just protect. And here's why this matters for generational survival. The noun orientation is inherently unsustainable. You can't keep a static pile of money relevant across changing economic conditions, tax regimes, technological disruptions, and social transformations forever. Inflation alone ensures that $1 in 1920 is worth about $18 today. A family that preserved the noun, kept the pile exactly as it was, would have lost 95% of its purchasing power. The families that survived didn't preserve the money. They preserved the ability to generate money. They preserved the verb, and the verb, the set of behavioral patterns we've been discussing, is what actually transfers across generations. Money is just the byproduct. This is why the Vanderbilt fortune evaporated, while the Rockefeller fortune endured. The Vanderbilts preserved the noun. The Rockefellers preserved the verb. John D. Rockefeller Jr. didn't just protect his father's money. He built Rockefeller Center, funded the founding of multiple universities, created the family's philanthropic infrastructure, and, most importantly, taught his children the behavioral patterns that would allow them to continue building. The money was almost secondary. The verb was everything. Pattern number 12, the first link protocol, starting from zero. Now let me address the elephant in the room. Everything I've discussed so far, family constitutions, governance structures, family offices, staggered trust distributions, that's all well and good if you're worth $50 million. But what if you're watching this and your family doesn't have wealth yet? What if you're the first person in your family who's even thinking about this? This is the pattern that matters most to the most people. I call it the first link protocol, because here's the reality. Someone has to be the first link in the chain. Every dynasty that exists today, every Rothschild, every Rockefeller, every family that's been wealthy for centuries, at some point, there was a first link. Someone who started with nothing and decided to build something that would outlast them. The first link has the hardest job. They have to build the wealth and install the behavioral patterns simultaneously. They have no template, no inherited structure, no family office to lean on. They're building the airplane while flying it. But here's the good news. The first link has one advantage that no subsequent generation will ever have again. They have the clarity of the struggle. They know viscerally what it takes to build wealth because they're doing it right now. That clarity is the most powerful behavioral pattern installer in existence, if they use it intentionally. So here's the first link protocol, the specific steps to start building generational wealth from zero. Step 1. Write your family's origin story, even though it's just beginning. You might think origin stories are only for families that have been wealthy for generations. Wrong. The most powerful origin story is the one being written right now. Document your journey, the sacrifices, the decisions, the failures, the recoveries. Write it down. Record it. Your great-grandchildren will read this someday, and it will be the most valuable document in your family's archive. Why? Because 50 years from now, when your grandchildren are tempted to spend recklessly, they'll read about the year you worked 3 jobs to save your first $10,000. They'll read about the month you chose to invest instead of buying the car you wanted. That story, your story, will install the delayed gratification pattern more powerfully than any lecture ever could. Step 2. Install behavioral patterns. Before you have the money, don't wait until you're wealthy to start building the behavioral infrastructure. Start now. Create a family budget and review it monthly, even if the numbers are small. The behavior of reviewing finances together is the same whether you're managing $5,000 or $5 million. Talk about money openly with your children, age-appropriate but real. Let them see you make financial decisions. Let them see you delay gratification. Let them see you recover from setbacks. The families that fail aren't the ones who never had enough money to create structures. They're the ones who waited until they had money to start creating structures. And by then, the behavioral patterns were already set. Step 3. Create a minimum viable governance structure. You don't need a 100-page family constitution when your net worth is $50,000, but you do need something, a written document, even 1 page, that says what this family's money is for, how we make financial decisions, together, not unilaterally, what our distribution philosophy is, how much we spend versus save versus give, how we handle disagreements about money, what we expect from each family member. This document will evolve over time, but having it from the beginning establishes the principle that the family's financial life is governed by intention, not impulse. That principle, once established, scales with the wealth. Step 4. Begin the education pipeline. Immediately, your children's relationship with money is being shaped right now, whether you're intentionally shaping it or not. They're watching, they're absorbing, they're forming money scripts that will govern their financial behavior for the rest of their lives. Start the pipeline. Give them age-appropriate financial responsibilities. Talk to them about what you're building and why. Involve them in family financial decisions when possible. Let them make small financial mistakes now so they don't make catastrophic ones later. Step 5. Design your estate plan for behavior, not just tax optimization. When you eventually create trusts and estate plans, design them for behavioral impact, not just tax efficiency. A trust that dumps $500,000 on a 25-year-old with zero conditions isn't an estate plan. It's a behavioral disaster. A trust that provides structured access tied to education, financial literacy, and demonstrated responsibility is an estate plan that builds the stewardship identity into the legal structure itself. Step 6. Accept that you are building a 100-year structure with 10-year visibility. This is the hardest mental shift for first-generation wealth builders. You're not building for your lifetime. You're building for lifetimes you will never see. That means some of your work will feel thankless. Some of your structures will feel unnecessary. Some of your children will resist the very patterns you're trying to install. But if you do this right, 100 years from now, a family will gather for their annual meeting. They'll review their portfolio, debate their philanthropic strategy, resolve a conflict using a protocol you designed, and teach their children the stewardship identity you first articulated. They won't know your face, but they'll know your verb, and that right there is generational wealth. The anti-patterns, how wealth dies. Before I close, I want to walk through the anti-patterns, the specific behavioral patterns that kill generational wealth, because knowing what to avoid is just as important as knowing what to build. Anti-pattern 1, financial incest. This is the research term, not mine. Financial incest is when family members use money to control, manipulate, or punish each other. Parents who threaten to disinherit children who don't follow their wishes. Siblings who leverage trust distributions against each other. Spouses who weaponize financial information. This destroys wealth for a simple reason. It destroys trust, and without trust, no governance structure can function. People withdraw from the system. They hoard information. They make defensive decisions instead of strategic ones. The family fractures and the wealth follows. Anti-pattern 2, secret keeping. We already covered this in the communication section, but it's worth repeating as an anti-pattern. Financial secrets within families are like termites in a house. By the time you see the damage, the structure is already compromised. The most common secrets: hidden debt, undisclosed assets, side agreements with individual family members, and, this one surprises people, the full size of the family wealth. When the next generation doesn't know what they're inheriting, they can't prepare for it. And unprepared heirs are the fastest path to wealth destruction. Anti-pattern 3, the lone wolf. One family member, usually the most financially literate, but sometimes just the most assertive, who makes all decisions unilaterally. They don't share information. They don't seek input. They don't create governance structures because they don't see the need. This works fine as long as the lone wolf is competent and alive. The moment they're gone, whether through death, incapacity, or just aging out, the family discovers that no one else knows how the system works. The wealth is tangled in structures only one person understands. The investments are in vehicles only one person can access. The relationships with advisors are personal, not institutional. Lone wolves create single points of failure, and single points of failure always fail eventually. Anti-pattern 4, nostalgia lock. This is when a family becomes so attached to the way the founder did things that they refuse to adapt. The original investment strategy, the original business, the original properties, all frozen in amber, untouchable. This is the noun orientation taken to its extreme. The family is preserving the artifact rather than the process. And eventually, the world changes enough that the artifact becomes worthless. The families that survive don't preserve the founder's portfolio. They preserve the founder's adaptability. They ask not, what did Grandpa invest in? But, what would Grandpa invest in if he were alive today, given what he knew about adapting to change? Anti-pattern 5, the entitlement trap. This is the gradual, then sudden shift from stewardship to entitlement. It usually happens over 2 to 3 generations, so slowly that no one notices until the spending has already become unsustainable. The entitlement trap works like this. Each generation grows up with slightly more than the last. Each generation's baseline for normal ratchets upward. No single increase feels excessive, but the cumulative effect is that the family's lifestyle gradually disconnects from the portfolio's sustainable support rate. The trap is insidious because the spending never feels reckless in the moment. A nicer house feels like a reasonable upgrade. Private schools feel like a good investment in the children. A family vacation home feels like a unifying experience, and all of those things might be true individually, but collectively they create a lifestyle that the portfolio can't sustain, and no one notices until the math breaks. The synthesis, how it all connects. Let me bring all 12 patterns together, because none of them work in isolation. They form an integrated behavioral system, and the system is what creates generational wealth, not any single pattern. Here's the full architecture. Pattern 1, delayed gratification code, the foundation. Without this, every other pattern erodes over time. This is the ability to prioritize the family's future over any individual's present. Pattern 2, stewardship identity, the operating system. This determines whether each family member relates to the wealth as an owner or a caretaker. Everything else flows from this. Pattern 3, communication architecture, the nervous system. This is how information, trust, and decisions flow through the family. When this breaks down, the whole organism dies. Pattern 4, investment behavior. Gap, the engine. This is how the family grows the wealth, not through brilliance, but through disciplined behavior over time. Pattern 5, lifestyle calibration, the thermostat. This is how the family keeps its spending in alignment with its resources. Without this, the engine burns more fuel than it produces. Pattern 6, education pipeline, the transmission mechanism. This is how behavioral patterns transfer from one generation to the next. Without this, each generation starts from scratch. Pattern 7, governance. Skeleton, the bones. This is the structure that holds everything together, even when individual family members fail. Pattern 8, philanthropy bridge, the meaning maker. This is how the family connects its wealth to purpose, giving the steward identity something to steward. Pattern 9, resilience protocol, the immune system. This is how the family responds to crises, growing stronger rather than shattering. Pattern 10, spouse integration, the expansion protocol. This is how the family incorporates new members without losing its behavioral coherence. Pattern 11, the wealth verb, the philosophy. This is the shift from preserving a thing to continuing a process, from noun to verb, from fortress to engine. Pattern 12, the first link protocol, the origin. This is how you start when there's nothing to build on yet, how one person becomes the first link in a chain that hasn't begun. These patterns aren't independent, they reinforce each other. Stewardship identity makes delayed gratification feel meaningful. Communication architecture makes governance possible. Education pipeline makes the stewardship identity transferable. The wealth verb makes everything adaptive rather than static. And the anti-patterns? They're what happens when these patterns degrade. Financial incest is communication architecture in reverse. The entitlement trap is lifestyle calibration in reverse. The lone wolf is governance in reverse. The same systems that build generational wealth, when corrupted, destroy it. There's no neutral. Your family is either building these patterns or eroding them. Every day, every decision, every conversation, it's moving in one direction or the other. So, let me leave you with this. If you take nothing else from this video, remember, generational wealth is not a number. It's not a trust fund. It's not a portfolio. It's not a mansion or a family business or a stack of stocks. Generational wealth is a set of behaviors, repeated, protected, and transmitted across time. It's delayed gratification turned into identity. It's stewardship turned into culture. It's communication turned into trust. It's discipline turned into compounding. The money is just the scoreboard. The behaviors are the game. And the beautiful, terrifying truth is, the game is always on. Whether your family has $200 billion or $200 in savings, the behavioral patterns are either being built or being lost. There is no standing still. If you're the first person in your family thinking about this, if you're the first link, your job is the hardest and the most important. What you build now won't just determine your financial future. It will shape the identity, behavior, and trajectory of every generation that comes after you. That's not pressure. That's purpose. If this video gave you a new way to think about generational wealth, hit that like button. It genuinely helps. Subscribe if you want to go deeper. I'm building out an entire series on family wealth strategy, and there's much more coming. Drop a comment with which pattern resonated most with you. I read every single one, and I might feature your insight in a future video. And share this with someone in your family, not because it'll go viral, but because the families that need this information the most are usually the last ones looking for it. I'll see you in the next one. In the next